The first grey light of morning had scarcely broken over the Thames when Holmes beckoned me through the wrought-iron gates of the Wetherby estate. The dew clung to the lawns like a sheen of silver, and not a soul spoke above a whisper. Scotland Yard men stood in stiff silhouettes along the river bank, their boots darkened by the wet grass, while Inspector Lestrade waited with his hat pressed against his chest, as though the whole affair had offended him personally. A chill wind moved through the reeds and carried with it the smell of stagnant water and overturned earth. Holmes, without a word, knelt beside the body. The gardener, one Mr. Elias Finch, lay half submerged where the shoreline met the estate's ornamental lily ponds. His coat snagged upon a splintered stake, fingers curled as though reaching for something just beyond his grasp. His face was pale with the waxen hue I had seen in many a battlefield hospital. Yet his eyes remained open, fixed upon the distant waters with that dreadful, unblinking curiosity possessed only by the newly dead. A hedge clipper lay beside him, rusted not by time but by some dark stain that did not come from river water. Holmes lifted the man's wrist, studied his pulse, though he knew it long extinguished, then leaned forward with such abrupt intensity that Lestrade stepped back. There was mud beneath the dead man's nails, not from the river bank, but from soft soil that smelled faintly of crushed violets. Holmes brushed the dirt beneath his nose, inhaling sharply. "He died here," he murmured, "but not for here." I asked him what he meant, but he only gestured toward the gardener's face. "Look at the eyes, Watson. Whatever he witnessed before death left him too terrified to close them." A ripple disturbed the water. Holmes turned his head as though expecting a figure to rise from the reeds. No one did. Were I not now compelled to record this case for those who follow Holmes's work with such fervor, I might have left the matter in official silence. But I know there are minds reading these recollections who seek truth as earnestly as we did that morning. If you stay with me through each step of this investigation, perhaps you too shall glimpse what held that poor gardener's gaze. Though the case occupies my thoughts even now, it is that peculiar morning upon the Wetherby grounds that returns to me most vividly in restless dreams. The river lay still as polished glass, and yet every instinct told me that movement lurked beneath, waiting for the first rays of daylight to reveal its presence. I arrived moments behind Holmes, who had been summoned at an abhorrently early hour by Lestrade. My friend possessed that calm, wakeful air he exhibited only when a matter intrigued him deeply. He walked as though his mind moved 3 paces ahead of his body. Lestrade greeted us with the stiff politeness of a man uncertain whether he desired our help or resented needing it. He removed his hat as we approached, revealing hair slicked back more hastily than usual. "Drowned," he said simply, gesturing towards the reeds. "Accidental, if you ask me. The fellow slipped. Hardly a scandal, but Lord Wetherby insisted you be called. Seems he values your opinion, Holmes." Holmes responded with the faintest hum, neither pleased nor dismissive. He stepped past Lestrade and beckoned me to follow. What I saw then was no mere drowning. The gardener's limbs were drawn as though he had struggled against bonds, not water. The splintered wooden stake that caught his coat bore fresh grooves where fingers might have clawed desperately for purchase. Holmes brushed aside the reeds with surgical precision, exposing the gardener's boots. "Look closely, Watson," he said. "There is mud from 2 distinct soils here. One of them does not belong to the river's edge." I knelt, inhaling the scent of damp minerals and decaying lilies. Holmes was correct. One clump of dirt was dark and silty, consistent with the marsh beside us. The other was pale, fragrant, and flecked with bright petals. "Rose beds," I suggested. Holmes nodded. "Precisely. But the rose beds lie near the western orchard, a full 1/4 mile from here. Why begin one's work there and end one's life here, at an hour reserved for sleep?" A shadow passed behind us. The head groundskeeper, a stern, weather-worn fellow with hands like knotted oak, approached mutely. He cast only a fleeting glance upon the corpse before looking away, jaw clenched so tightly I feared his teeth might shatter. Holmes stood and addressed him gently. "You knew Mr. Finch well?" The man lifted his chin but avoided Holmes's eyes. He tended the lilies, worked alone mostly, kept to himself. "A solitary man?" Holmes asked. "A troubled one?" Holmes let the silence stretch long enough for truth to seep out like a slow bleeding wound. At last, the groundskeeper exhaled, voice hushed. "He came to me last night, raving about eyes in the water. Said they were watching him. Human eyes, he said, but too large to be natural. I sent him home, thinking he'd had too much drink." Holmes and I exchanged a look. Lestrade scoffed, though the expression faltered when Finch's pale face caught the rising sun just so, making his glassy stare appear almost animate. Holmes leaned closer to the body once more. "There are signs of restraint here," he whispered. "Bruising around the wrists. Rope, not reeds." "Could be from struggling in the water," Lestrade offered, his tone defensive. Holmes shook his head. "No water washes soil into the creases of a man's palms in this pattern. He gripped something while upright, before immersion." As if to punctuate Holmes's declaration, a quiet ripple disturbed the pond. A circular disturbance spread outward, though no stone or fish caused it. Holmes turned his gaze sharply to the water, and I sensed he was calculating distances, depths, currents, and something more intangible. Possibility. We carried the body to a stretcher and watched as two constables bore it away toward the estate path. The sun had climbed higher now, gilding the mansion's windows and leaving the pond in half shadow. Holmes lingered at the edge while Lestrade departed to question the household. He knelt, tracing the waterline with 2 fingers, then rising slowly. "The river conceals more than mud," he murmured. "You believe Finch saw something real?" "I believe he saw something he should not have." His voice dipped to a low, contemplative register. "And I believe he came to stop it." A hush settled upon the grounds. Even the birds seemed unwilling to interrupt Holmes's thoughts. "Watson," he continued, eyes fixed upon the water, "make note of this. Fear alone does not hold a man's eyes open after death." The breeze stirred once more, and I shuddered. For the moment we departed without answers. But the river remembered. By the time Holmes and I returned to Baker Street, the weight of the morning's events had settled upon me like a damp coat that refused to dry. Though the rising sun had long since dispelled the chill from the river bank, I found that even the familiar warmth of our sitting-room hearth could not purge the image of Elias Finch's staring eyes from my thoughts. The fire cracked obligingly, casting a flickering amber glow upon Holmes, who sat at the table with sleeves rolled high, sorting through samples of soil arranged in neat, irregular patches upon squares of linen. Each was labeled in his swift, precise handwriting. "You observe the gardener's boots," he remarked without glancing up. "Yet the matter of the roses is not our only peculiarity." I settled into my chair with a weary sigh. "Pray, enlighten me." Holmes lifted a vial containing a darker smudge of earth. "This is riverbed sediment. It carries the odor of marsh gas and phosphorus decay. Common enough." He set it aside and reached for a second vial, paler and fragrant. "This originates from the western orchard, richer in potassium, flecked with petal residue. The gardener certainly visited that location. Yet this," he raised a third cloth, "was found beneath his nails. It contains mineral oil." I frowned. "Machinery." "Precisely. The estate boasts mechanical implements, but none stored near the orchard. One must travel some distance to reach the workshops where such oil is used." I protested. He may have cleaned tools prior to dawn. Holmes regarded me with the tolerant gaze of a schoolmaster humoring a bright but unimaginative pupil. "At 4 o'clock in the morning, Watson? In clothing suited for river labor rather than the orchard?" "No." The gardener's actions served a purpose he dared not formalize in daylight. The words unsettled me more than I cared to admit. I attempted distraction by pouring tea from yesterday's pot, though the liquid tasted as flat and cold as my nerves. Holmes, never one to linger in reflective silence when the scent of mystery beckoned, rose abruptly and reached for his coat. "We must not waste the day. I shall revisit the river presently." "You intend to return already?" He nodded. "Before the household reconfigures itself into civility, the hour for secrets is early and brief." Yet when he reached the stairwell, he paused, as though struck by an impulse contrary to his own nature. Turning back, he tucked 2 envelopes into my hand. One contains a list of land registry offices and archivists. Visit them all and gather any historical documents concerning the Weatherby estate. Prior ownership, property disputes, geological surveys, particularly anything predating the current manor. "And the second?" I asked. "The widow's address." He said it without flourish, as though the matter were inevitable. "You presume she will speak with us?" "I presume grief loosens stricter tongues than fear," he replied, then vanished down the stairs with his coat's hem snapping like a banner behind him. I left shortly thereafter, navigating London's tangled corridors of bureaucracy with more determination than enthusiasm. The archivists were reluctant, but persistence served us as faithfully as powder in a firearm. I uncovered a slim collection of records. The estate did once belong to another family, the Ravenscrofts, before they were ruined by a fire that consumed the manor nearly 35 years earlier. Curiously, the original building plans included subterranean chambers that were never fully documented in insurance reports. Several workers died during initial construction, though the causes were recorded merely as accidents due to unstable earth. A phrase in one report caught my eye: unusually porous soil, prone to collapse, formerly marshland of uncertain depth. Such descriptions reminded me uncomfortably of Holmes's earlier remark about something in the depths predating the estate. I returned to Baker Street near dusk, burdened not only by documents, but by an inexplicable sense of dread. Holmes was already seated, gloves drying beside the hearth. They were soaked to the wrist. "You went into the water," I remarked. He did not deny it. "Purely to measure depth and current." "Nothing more." Yet his face betrayed irritation, as though the river had mocked him rather than yielded answers. "You found nothing?" He hesitated, just long enough to confirm he had found something. "There is a shelf beneath the surface," he said slowly. "Metal rigging, old, rusted, yet portions are scraped clean. Recently. A dock? More likely a platform. Its purpose eludes me. And yet," he lowered his voice, "someone has been there within the past day. The grooves are too sharp, the metal too bright." He permitted no further questions that night. Instead, he retired to the windowsill, staring into the lamplight-drenched street like a hawk observing prey concealed in brush. Hours passed in uneasy quiet before he finally spoke again. "Watson, you recall the gardener's expression?" "Vividly," I admitted. Holmes nodded. "Terror does not linger so distinctly without cause. He saw something, or someone. You suggest a witness rather than an accident." "I suggest a conspiracy of silence," he corrected. "One that reaches from the orchard to the river's deepest point." "What of the widow?" I asked. "Will we visit her?" "We shall, at first light." He leaned back, eyes narrowing. "But not merely for condolences. There are words the dead leave unfinished, and the living are often too afraid to speak them until they are addressed directly." The fire crackled, casting fresh shadows across the room. Outside, the city moved in muted waves. Distant carriage wheels, murmuring pedestrians, the metallic clang of a lamplighter completing his rounds. I closed my journal, exhausted, yet sleep would not claim me easily. Holmes remained by the window long after midnight, unmoving except for the faint tension in his jaw. Whatever he sought in the darkness, I doubted he would find rest in it. At last he spoke, scarcely above a whisper. "Watson, tomorrow we ask not what killed Elias Finch, but why he died awake." His silhouette was a dark cutout against the pallid glow beyond the glass. I did not answer. There was nothing more to say. The night was long, and dawn promised only deeper shadows. We set out at first light, the air crisp with a faint promise of rain. The hansom cab carried us eastward through streets still shaking off the remnants of night, shopkeepers unlatching shutters while chimney sweeps cast black silhouettes across the pale morning sky. Holmes rode in silence, fingers steepled beneath his chin, eyes fixed on the passing architecture as though London itself concealed answers beneath its soot-stained bricks. I knew better than to disturb his thoughts when they assumed that particular stillness, for it was not silence but calculation. Our destination lay in Whitechapel, and as we approached the narrower alleys, the cab's progress slowed. The district was alive with early industry, laborers marching resolutely toward dockyards, women hanging laundry above puddled cobblestones, stray children darting past with laughter that felt too bright for so bleak a morning. Holmes stepped out before the cab fully halted, tossing a coin to the driver and striding toward a narrow row of tenements sagging beneath years of neglect. "Mrs. Finch lodges here," he murmured, without referencing any visible guide. I could only assume he memorized such locations as other men memorize scripture. Inside, the hallway smelled of boiling starch and coal smoke. A thin woman in a kerchief directed us up a creaking flight of stairs to a room at the end of a dim corridor. Holmes knocked once, firmly, without hesitance. Seichi Sanchi. Pause followed, broken by the faint scrape of a bolt withdrawn. Mrs. Finch stood framed in the doorway like a discarded portrait. She was younger than I expected, with the pinched expression of one accustomed to hardship long before widowhood touched her. Her eyes were swollen from weeping, yet she masked her grief with a stoicism that struck me as more tragic than tears. "Dr. Watson," she asked, her voice tentative. "My husband spoke of you once. Said you were a military man." I bowed my head. "I served in Afghanistan. I'm deeply sorry for your loss." Holmes inclined toward her with grave politeness. "Madame, may we come in?" Her composure faltered, grief breaking through like water through fractured glass. She stepped aside. The room was modest but tidy, a small table laid for two, though only one seat remained pulled out, a Bible resting beside a half-sewn garment, and upon the mantel a faded daguerreotype of a younger Elias Finch, smiling with unexpected softness. A kettle whistled faintly atop the stove. Forgotten. We sat only when she insisted. For a time she busied her trembling hands with pouring tea, though she spilled a few drops and apologized as though committing a great offense. Holmes began gently. "Tell us about your husband's final days. You must not fear judgment. We seek only truth." She folded her hands in her lap, eyes fixed upon the table's grain. He had grown restless these past weeks. Woke before dawn, returned home after dark, sometimes without a word. I asked what troubled him, but he said it was nothing fit for a woman's worry. He used to share everything with me, even his smallest tasks. Lately, he spoke in riddles. "What sort of riddles?" I asked. She hesitated, then reached into a drawer and produced a crumpled scrap of waterproof fabric, torn, stained, and partially scorched. She placed it before us, as one places evidence of infidelity. "I found this in his coat the night before he died. He tried to hide it, but I noticed the tear when I mended his pocket. It looked as though it belonged to a lantern, not his. He carried no such thing. When I asked about it, he said he wished he'd never gone to look, and that some things ought to remain beneath the water." Holmes unfolded the fragment with careful fingers. The material was indeed from a lantern casing, but sturdier than those used by gardeners. Its design suggested industrial manufacture, not household use. "Did he ever mention another man?" Holmes asked quietly. Someone he feared. Her lips quivered. She nodded. He never named him. But he said the man spent time by the river long after the estate slept. Elias said he heard voices there at dawn, always just before sunrise. He thought they were digging for something, though he never saw what. Holmes exchanged a glance with me, his expression tightening with confirmation rather than surprise. Mrs. Finch continued, voice diminishing to a whisper. The night before he died, he woke from sleep and walked outside. I followed him to the stairwell, and he stood there gripping the railing like a man facing execution. He whispered, "If I do not return, remember that I tried to warn them." I begged him to stay, but he would not be persuaded. A hollow silence followed. Outside, a vendor's cart rumbled past, its wheels rattling over uneven stones. Holmes leaned forward. "Madam, there is one more matter. You must forgive the intrusion. Show me his forearm." She recoiled, alarmed. "What could you want with that?" "He bore a wound," Holmes said softly. "Fresh, likely inflicted within his final week." Her resolve crumbled. With trembling fingers, she opened a small wooden box beside the bedside table and removed a blood-spotted cloth. Unwrapping it, she revealed a gardening sleeve torn clean through, threads charred at the edges. "He came home injured 4 nights ago," she confessed. "Said he caught it on a tool. I thought nothing of it until now." Holmes inspected the tear. His eyes sharpened. This was torn by metal, thin, curved, and forcibly struck. Not a tool, but machinery. Before he could elaborate, footsteps echoed down the corridor. Heavy, deliberate. Holmes rose, signaling me silently to remain still. The footsteps paused outside the door, and for a moment all breath seemed to leave the room. Then they retreated, slow and measured, down the stairs and into the street. Holmes crossed the room and peered through the curtains. I joined him in time to glimpse a man striding into the fog, a tall figure with one notable deformity. His lower lip hung slightly askew as though twisted long ago by scar or injury. His gait bore a subtle swaying motion as though accustomed to wading through water rather than walking on cobblestones. "He followed us," I murmured. "No," Holmes corrected. "He followed her." Mrs. Finch's hands flew to her mouth. I have never seen him before. Holmes turned from the window, coat already buttoned. "You will see him again. Take care never to walk alone near the river, madam. And should any man come asking questions, any man, you must send word to Baker Street at once." She nodded, pale as moonlight. We left her trembling in the silent room, lantern fragment wrapped once more upon the table like a relic from a drowned world. As we stepped into the chill street, the fog coiled around us like the breath of something ancient rising from hidden depths. Holmes paused, gaze sweeping the alley. "The game quickens," he murmured, "and the dead are speaking faster than the living." We walked on. Night had reclaimed London by the time we reached Baker Street, yet Holmes did not retire to his violin, nor to the restless contemplations that often seized him after a day of inquiry. Instead, he set about preparing for our return to the estate with the calculated silence of a man threading a needle through darkness. I watched him pack a small haversack, a collapsible lantern of his own design, 2 coils of cord, a flask of oil, a slender crowbar polished to near surgical sheen, and, somewhat unnervingly, my army-issue revolver. "I trust we are not expecting gunfire," I remarked, tightening my gloves. Holmes fastened the clasp of the bag with a metallic snap. "I expect only that truth resists extraction." He did not elaborate further, and I did not press him. Moments later, we descended the stairs and hailed a cab. The journey to the Weatherby estate unfolded beneath a sky moody with low clouds, the moon veiled yet bright enough to cast watery reflections upon rooftops. Holmes sat forward, leaning into the wind as though eager to be carried faster, his profile a sharp silhouette against the night. We dismissed the cab half a mile from the grounds and continued on foot. It was near midnight, and London's restless hum had quieted to the distant murmur of late taverns and the occasional clatter of hooves from unseen avenues. The countryside beyond the city's edge lay in near total silence, save for the faint rustle of branches above us. By the time the wrought iron gates rose before us, the estate was cloaked in near total darkness. Only one faint light flickered in an upper window of the manor, too dim and too distant to betray its watcher. Holmes led us not toward the main path, but around the side gardens, slipping through trimmed hedgerows with the swift stealth of a cat. The scent of damp soil and crushed leaves lingered beneath our boots. At the orchard, he paused and crouched low, brushing aside a patch of disturbed moss. "Observe," he whispered. "Boot tracks, 3 sets, overlapping. One heavy-treaded, one narrow-soled, and one dragging the right heel. These were made within the last hour." "Finch?" I whispered. Holmes shook his head. He limped on the left. "These are new." The breeze shifted, carrying with it the faintest scent of lamp oil, sharp, metallic, foreign to the orchard's natural musk. Holmes raised a hand, silent command, then moved toward the riverbank with slow, deliberate steps. The estate ponds glimmered beneath the moon, pale as polished pewter. The reeds swayed with an eerie synchronicity, whispering secrets in the dark. Holmes knelt by the bank, brushing his fingers across the water's edge. Something clinked faintly beneath the surface. He reached into the reeds and withdrew an object half claimed by mud. A lantern, heavy and industrial, its frame bent at an unnatural angle as though crushed by a powerful hand. "This is the missing half of the fragment Mrs. Finch gave us," he said, voice tight with satisfaction. "Notice the dent here, just wide enough to catch a sleeve. This lantern was torn apart with force, not by accident." I knelt beside him. The glass was cracked inward, not outward, and the wick holder bent like twisted bone. The lantern had not simply fallen, it had been fought over. Holmes turned the object, letting moonlight reveal a scorched smear along its base, blackened and metallic. He scraped the residue with a fingernail, lifted it to his nose, and inhaled. Phosphorine compound, used to ignite low-light illumination in industrial excavation sites. "You mean the gardener found machinery?" "I mean," Holmes said, rising slowly, "someone did not wish him to illuminate what lay below." Before I could respond, a sharp crack echoed from the orchard behind us, distant but unmistakable. A gunshot. Birds erupted from the trees in a violent flurry, and the reeds around us trembled with sudden life. Holmes gripped my arm and pulled me into the shadows. "Down!" We dropped behind a low stone embankment. The gunshot was followed by hurried footsteps, twigs snapping beneath hurried boots. I caught sight of a figure darting between apple trees, a rifle cradled in his arms. The man did not look toward us. His aim was fixed upon the water itself, not the shore. Holmes exhaled, half incredulous. "He is firing into the pond." The rifle cracked again. The bullet tore through lily pads and vanished into the depths with a muffled splash. Another shot followed, lower, angled toward the bottom. I whispered. What could he be shooting at? Holmes' eyes glinted unnervingly. Something that surfaced. We crouched motionless, breaths shallow, until the figure moved off, disappearing along the orchard path toward the manor. When the sound of his footfalls finally faded, Holmes stood and brushed grass from his coat, exhaling slowly. "That man is no simple groundskeeper," he murmured. "His aim is too disciplined, his posture too trained." "Military?" I asked. Holmes tilted his head thoughtfully. "Possibly. Or someone accustomed to hunting foes beneath the waterline." He gazed again into the pond. Not a ripple remained. The water lay still, as though feigning innocence. "Come, Watson," he said at last. "We must leave before our presence is discovered. This estate watches more closely at night than any jail." We navigated back through the hedgerows, but just as we reached the boundary wall, another voice carried through the air, soft, trembling, distinctly feminine. "You mustn't be here." We turned. Lady Weatherby stood beneath the arch of the orchard gate, her nightdress fluttering in the breeze, face drawn and pale beneath unpinned hair. She clutched a thick shawl around her shoulders, as though fending off more than cold. Holmes remained poised but respectful. "Your ladyship, we did not intend intrusion, but your gardener did not drown by mischance." She closed her eyes, swallowing. "I know." The admission struck me harder than the gunfire. Holmes stepped closer. "Then you must speak plainly. Why was he near the water at dawn? What has been occurring beneath your estate?" Her voice trembled so violently she could scarcely form words. "He saw something he should not have. All of us have. My husband said we must never speak of it, that the river buries secrets better than any grave. But I cannot bear it any longer." "What did he see?" Holmes whispered. She looked past us, toward the water, as though expecting eyes to surface anew. "Doors," she said at last. "Not doors made by men, but stone, older than any house. We tried to open them. My husband believes there is treasure beyond them. I believe only ruin." Before we could question further, heavy footsteps approached from the manor. She recoiled, fear spreading across her face like ink through linen. "Go," she begged. "Please, I cannot be seen with you." Holmes touched his hat in silent acknowledgement. We slipped back into the night, leaving the estate behind like a wounded thing hiding its own injuries. Only when we reached the road did Holmes finally speak. "She fears discovery more than guilt," he murmured, "and she fears what lies beneath the water more than either." We walked on toward London under a sky drained of stars, the silence between us heavy as unspoken prophecy. The lantern fragments clinked faintly in Holmes's bag, shards of truth torn from the darkness, waiting to be made whole. Dawn found us once more at Baker Street, though neither Holmes nor I had slept. The hearth still emitted faint heat from the embers I coaxed into life before sunrise, but the room remained heavy with that peculiar tension which visits only in the aftermath of concealed truths. Holmes stood rigid beside the mantel, arms folded, eyes fixed upon a map of the estate he had sketched from memory on our return. His expression was not one of contemplation alone, but of vexation, rare in him and therefore deeply unsettling. "The lantern beneath the reeds," he said abruptly, as though continuing a conversation I had not begun, "was not dropped in panic. It was seized from Finch and destroyed. Someone sought to keep the river dark." I rubbed my temples, weary from the long night. "But why destroy it rather than hide it?" "For the same reason a thief breaks a lock rather than simply closing it," Holmes replied sharply. "To prevent its use again." Before I could offer a rebuttal, he was already shrugging into his coat. We returned to the estate at midday. In daylight, fears often masquerade as propriety, and tongues loosen when shadows shorten. He instructed me to bring my medical bag, though he refused to say why. We made our way again through London's awakening streets, carriages rattling like cogs in some vast industrial machine, the city shrugging off its nocturnal shroud with reluctant resolve. As we reached the countryside, sunlight spilled across the Weatherby grounds in long, golden ribbons, transforming the same place that had felt hostile and clandestine by night into something deceptively pastoral. Yet there was no mistaking the tension. Servants moved about the lawns with forced cheer, their eyes sliding away from us whenever Holmes approached. The atmosphere resembled that of a household expecting not guests but auditors, where one false word might undo them all. Holmes addressed the head footman with polite formality. "Please inform Lord Weatherby that I require interviews with his staff. Individually, if you would be so kind." The footman stiffened. "His lordship is indisposed." Holmes smiled, a polite and utterly merciless gesture. Then I shall begin without him. We were escorted to a small receiving room overlooking the orchard. Holmes positioned himself in a high-backed chair beside the window, where light fell across his face at such an angle that his eyes appeared pale and cold as river stone. I sat opposite, taking notes, though my true purpose was to observe reactions better than penmanship. The first to enter was a kitchen maid, young and trembling, her hands clutching her apron like a widow clutching a shroud. Holmes spoke gently, but with that precise cadence of inquiry that strips lies as cleanly as a surgeon's scalpel. "You were awake the night Mr. Finch died?" She nodded, barely audible. "I heard voices. Not words, just voices." "Where?" Holmes asked. "By the water, and footsteps. 3 sets. One of them ran." Holmes leaned forward. "Did Finch run?" She shook her head violently. "No, sir. He walked. Slow. Like he knew where he was going." Her hands began to shake. Holmes dismissed her kindly, but she fled the room as though from a confession booth. Next came the groundskeeper, the same weather-worn man we had seen by the river. His jaw was set with iron defiance, but his eyes betrayed sleeplessness. Holmes wasted no time. "You argued with Finch the night before his death." The man's face blanched, then hardened. "He broke rules, wandered where he wasn't meant to be." "Rules set by whom?" Holmes asked quietly. The man swallowed, tongue heavy in his mouth. At length he replied, "Not by me." Holmes rose, towering though not physically imposing. "Your fear is tangible. It is not Finch you fear, but what he discovered." The groundskeeper looked toward the orchard, then toward the house, as though both held equal danger. "This estate has work done at hours the master never sees," he whispered. "Work paid in silence. I keep gardens, not ghosts." Holmes stepped closer. "Then who keeps the river?" The man's eyes widened, but he fled without another word. A tense chill swept through the room after he left, as though even the walls had overheard too much. Holmes exhaled through his nose, displeased. "We are striking chords too close to the truth," he murmured. "They fear each other as much as us." The third visitor was the cook, stout and red-faced, with an apron stained by honest toil. She sat heavily, exhaling as if relieved for the chance to speak. "That poor man," she muttered. "He tried to warn the others. Said dawn was the hour. Everything moved. Said the water breathed." Holmes's voice lowered. "What did he mean by moved?" She twisted her apron. "I don't know. I never saw it, but I heard it. Sounded like wood dragging across metal, deep below." Holmes exchanged a sharp glance with me. "Machinery again." "And the night he died?" he asked. "I heard men by the water just before sunrise. They weren't whispering. They argued, 2 of them, then a splash, and silence." "Voices you recognized?" She hesitated. "I'll lose my place if I say." Holmes leaned closer, not threatening, inviting. "You will lose more if the truth rots here." She swallowed hard, then whispered a name so softly it barely existed in the air. "The steward." Holmes nodded slowly. "Thank you. You have done more good than you know." She left trembling but lighter, as though unburdened. When the door closed, Holmes spoke through clenched teeth. "Watson, there is a conspiracy here, not of passion, but of structure. The estate is being used for covert labor. Finch discovered the nature of it and was silenced. For what purpose? Excavation? Theft?" Holmes turned to the window, eyes narrowing at the glittering pond. "Perhaps. But there is more. They are not merely taking something from the depths. They may be opening something." Before I could question him further, a sudden crash echoed from the courtyard. Shouting, clattering boots, the unmistakable thud of a locked door forced inward. Holmes snatched his coat and moved swiftly to the hall. I followed as 2 servants ran past, pale and breathless. "What happened?" Holmes demanded. "A break-in," one gasped. "Someone tried to enter the servants' quarters, at the back entrance. Broke the lock clean through." Holmes froze. Was anything taken? No, sir. They fled when the dogs barked. Holmes narrowed his eyes. Not thieves, then. Saboteurs. We hurried outside. The broken door hung crookedly from its hinges, splinters scattered like fallen teeth. Footprints trailed across the mud, one set leading to the river, another smaller set circling back toward the manor. Holmes knelt, tracing the prints with surgical precision, murmuring measurements beneath his breath. Then he rose, face darkening. They were not searching for valuables, he said. They were searching for information. What information? Anything Finch might have left behind. I shivered. They believed the dead man kept records. Holmes' eyes sharpened like a blade drawn from scabbard. And if he did, Watson, those records are the key to his death. A breeze swept across the grounds, carrying faint ripples from the pond. The sunlight, once warm, now seemed too bright, exposing the estate like a stage upon which unseen actors played roles rehearsed long before our arrival. Holmes turned toward the manor, his coat whipping behind him. "We find the steward next," he said, "and we do not. Ask him questions. We corner him with answers and see which truth he cannot bear." Together we crossed the lawns toward the house, no longer guests, investigators marching toward open conflict. The estate watched us in silence. The steward proved elusive. Word arrived that he had taken ill and confined himself to his private quarters, though the footman who delivered this message could not meet Holmes's gaze when he said it. Holmes merely nodded, as though he had expected nothing less, and suggested we take fresh air while the household composed itself. We left the manor not to escape, but to observe, moving along the gravelled paths with deliberate slowness, as though we were gentlemen out for a pastoral stroll rather than hunters pacing the perimeter of an unseen snare. The sun hung low, balancing upon the horizon with the warm hue of polished brass. Its fading rays glinted across the surface of the pond, where lily pads floated with deceptive stillness. Holmes stopped beside the water and crouched, letting his fingertips hover just above the reeds. "Do you feel it?" he asked. I frowned, listening. At first there was only wind and the rustle of sedge. But then, beneath it, a faint, rhythmic tremor, too uniform to be natural, pulsed through the soil. Not a noise exactly, but a pressure, as though the earth itself exhaled. "It is mechanical," Holmes murmured. "A piston or wheel turning in water, not in air. Something below." A chill traveled down my spine, unfamiliar even from war. I had heard cannon, mortars, and tunnel collapse beneath the Afghan sands, but never machinery that seemed to breathe like a slumbering beast beneath water. Before I could respond, footsteps crunched behind us. Lady Weatherby approached, wrapped in a pale shawl and moving with that restrained grace taught to those who spend their lives watched by society. Yet no social veneer could hide the tremble in her hands. "I warned you not to return," she whispered, eyes darting toward the orchard. "If my husband learns you've been here since dawn, he will not tolerate it." Holmes rose slowly. "Madam, this matter surpassed tolerance the moment your gardener died with his eyes open." Her composure fractured. She swayed, gripping the shawl tighter, pale lips parted in confession she had long resisted. "You must understand," she said hoarsely. "Finch was not the first to see it. The workers before him, they left. Some resigned, others disappeared, all before my marriage. My husband called them cowards. I called them wise." "What did they see?" I asked. She glanced toward the pond. The breeze ruffled the reeds in long, shivering waves. "Light beneath the water," she whispered, as though lanterns burned where no flame could live. And once, I saw a shape rise, just for a moment. Not a fish, not anything I know. Holmes's expression darkened, not with disbelief, but calculated restraint. "And your husband?" he asked. She hesitated. "He believes there is an older structure below, ruins from a settlement that sank long ago. He built machinery to access it, but I fear what lies below is not waiting to be opened. It is waiting to rise. Before Holmes could press further, a whistle split the air, sharp, metallic, urgent. Holmes seized my shoulder. "To the water's edge! Quickly!" We sprinted along the bank, Lady Weatherby trailing behind us with ragged breaths. From across the pond, a man's silhouette emerged upon the slope, crouched, lantern in hand, sweeping the light in wide, frantic arcs as though searching for something just beneath the surface. "Finch," I murmured, though even as I said it, I knew the figure was too tall, too rigid. Holmes hissed, "No, the steward." We watched in tense silence as he knelt, pressing a long pole into the water, feeling along the bottom with trembling resolve. He muttered to himself, words we could not hear. Then, abruptly, the lantern light flickered, caught upon something beneath the surface. A pale flash. Rounded. Smooth. Eyes. Large eyes, reflecting the lantern as though waiting for it. The steward recoiled with a strangled cry, stumbling backward into the mud. He scrambled to his feet and fled across the orchard, dropping the lantern, which rolled into the reeds and extinguished with a hiss. Lady Weatherby's nails dug into her palms. "This is how it begins," she whispered. "At dawn, always dawn." Holmes moved before she finished speaking. "We wait here until sunrise." We spent the long night hidden among the reeds, wrapped in silence broken only by the rhythmic churn beneath the earth. The moon drifted behind clouds. Frost formed on the grass. Insects hid in the cold. Holmes remained still as stone, breath shallow, gaze fixed upon the water. Just before sunrise, when night seems exhausted but day is not yet born, the water stirred. Not wind, not fish. The surface shifted upward, bulging as though something pressed from below. Water spilled backward, displaced from within. The reeds swayed outward. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the ground beneath us, neither natural nor wholly mechanical. Holmes's hand closed around my wrist. "Do not move," he whispered. The bulge subsided slowly, sinking back into the depths. The water settled, leaving only ripples fading outward in concentric rings, each smaller than the last. The dawn light finally crept across the horizon, painting the pond gold. Holmes rose at last, eyes narrowed in furious thought. "That was no mere tide," he said. "Something beneath the surface initiated movement, something timed precisely with dawn." "What is beneath there?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not what? Who?" The answer unsettled me, but Holmes did not elaborate. We left the estate at sunrise, dew clinging to our boots, exhaustion hanging heavy across our shoulders. Lady Weatherby remained behind, staring into the water with the stillness of a statue carved for mourning. Once the gates of the estate disappeared behind us, I finally spoke. "Holmes, do you believe her? That something beneath the water is alive?" Holmes looked east, where the sky shifted from gold to pale gray. "I believe fear is an unreliable narrator," he said softly. "But terror, Watson, terror is a truth unto itself." We walked the remaining miles in silence. Though we returned to London with the rising sun behind us, neither Holmes nor I felt the customary reassurance of familiar streets. The city seemed too loud, too alive, too indifferent to the strange pulse we had felt beneath the river. Holmes strode ahead of me up the stairs to our rooms, shedding his coat without a pause, and went straight to the stack of estate documents we had retrieved earlier. He spread them across the table as if conducting a battlefield inspection. "Observe this," he said, tapping a brittle blueprint with a gloved finger. "This was drafted not for the Weatherby family, but the Ravenscrofts. It details proposed renovations to the estate before the fire that destroyed the original manor." The paper crackled like winter leaves as he unfolded it further. A series of tunnels and chambers were depicted beneath the estate, more extensive than one might expect for a country property. The lowest structure was a large circular chamber positioned directly beneath the pond. "That design," I murmured, "resembles an aquifer system." Holmes nodded. "A Victorian flood control project intended to drain marshland and reclaim the valley." He turned to a second blueprint, newer, stamped with Weatherby's crest. Yet the current owner expanded upon those foundations. He built access shafts where the Ravenscrofts left sealed tunnels. I leaned over his shoulder, meaning the machinery we felt beneath the water was originally meant to pump water outward, not draw it in, Holmes finished. Someone has reversed its purpose. I stepped back, unsettled. To empty the chambers? Holmes shook his head. No, to reveal them. He moved then with pent-up energy, pacing the room as though trapped within the confines of a thought too large for stillness. Imagine a lake built atop forgotten stone. Once the water lowers, what emerges? Not simply ruins, but whatever was buried beneath them. "You believe the estate seeks to excavate underground structures," I said. "Illegally." "I believe they seek to open them," Holmes corrected. "And they wished Finch silent because he saw what lay behind those doors at dawn." His voice fell quiet. The silence that followed felt dense, thick with all that we could not yet name. After a brief meal, tea for me, nothing for Holmes, we departed again, this time not to the estate, but to the archives of civil engineering, where records of public works and failed infrastructure were kept. The clerk on duty recognized Holmes immediately and, with a fearful eagerness to cooperate, fetched a leather-bound register from the year of the Ravenscroft renovations. Holmes scanned the entries with quick eyes. Here, deaths during construction. 3 workers drowned in separate incidents, each reported without visible water ingress. Curious phrasing, is it not? Drowned, yet dry tunnels. He closed the ledger sharply. "We return to the estate tonight." The clerk paled. "At night, sir, that land." Holmes fixed him with a cool stare. "Speak plainly." The man swallowed. "They say lights burn in the marsh. Shapes move where there is no path. I've heard stories. Old ones." Holmes retrieved his hat. "Rumor is often the first draft of evidence. Come, Watson." We left before the clerk could devise fresh reasons to retain us. The journey back to the countryside felt different this time, no longer an excursion to a place of death, but a descent into a widening labyrinth. As dusk bled into evening, we reached the perimeter of the Weatherby estate, though we kept clear of the main gates. Holmes led us instead to a stone culvert, half hidden beneath brambles, its rusted bars bent outward as though by force. "You may require your revolver," he said. That is far from reassuring. He produced a lantern from his bag, this one strong enough to withstand rough handling, and we descended into darkness. The path beneath the manor was colder than December air, though outside the night remained temperate. The ground sloped downward until the tunnel opened into a vaulted chamber lined with damp stone. There, resting upon metal tracks corroded by time, stood machinery. Not modern, but unmistakably mechanical. Great iron wheels, thick chains, and a series of pistons rose from the water like bones of an ancient leviathan. The apparatus stretched beyond sight beneath the shadows, vanishing into submerged darkness. Holmes crouched beside the nearest piston, brushing his hand over fresh scrape marks. "This operated last night," he whispered. "The rust has been pushed aside. The metal is bright." I leaned closer, catching the faint scent of oil and wet stone. "Then someone must maintain it regularly." Holmes nodded grimly. "Not simply maintain it, drive it." A metallic creak reverberated through the chamber, the sound so faint that had I blinked, I might have missed it. Holmes snapped his head toward the tunnel. "We are not alone." We extinguished the lantern and crouched behind a rusted boiler casing. Footsteps echoed from the far end of the walkway, cautious, measured, accompanied by the faint clink of tools. A silhouette emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, carrying a lantern with a hooded visor. The steward. He passed close enough that I could hear his breath, ragged, anxious, and descended a metal stairway toward the deeper machinery. He paused and spoke to the darkness below. "We lower the water again at dawn," he murmured. "If the doors jam, we force them open. The master insists." A low sound answered him, not a voice, not quite, something between breath and movement. The steward flinched but did not flee. Instead, he descended further, vanishing into blackness. Holmes waited until silence reclaimed the chamber. "We leave," he whispered. "Without investigating further?" I asked, aghast. He placed a firm hand on my arm. "If we descend now, we become part of the machinery. We return when daylight does not threaten to trap us below." We climbed back through the culvert, boots scraping against damp stone. Emerging into the cold night air felt like returning from underwater, lungs burning with relief. As we walked toward the road, I looked back once more at the estate. "You have formed a theory," I said. "I see it in your eyes." Holmes did not deny it. "I have formed 3. None comfort me." He faced the horizon where the first hints of dawn glimmered like a blade drawn from a sheath. "Watson, this is no longer a drowning. It is an excavation, and what they intend to unearth may not wish to be found." We walked in silence, and behind us the earth pulsed with that slow, unnatural rhythm once more. The following evening found Holmes in an uncharacteristic state of quiet agitation, which manifested not as pacing or violin playing, but in stillness, far more unnerving in him than restlessness. He sat at the edge of our sitting-room table, hands clasped, gaze fixed on nothing visible. Even the lamplight seemed reluctant to disturb his thoughts. At last he spoke. "We return beneath the estate tonight," he said. "But this time we descend." I felt a chill despite the hearth's warmth. "Holmes, yesterday you warned that if we descended too far, we might not return." "That warning remains true," he replied calmly. "But the steward will lower the water at dawn. If we wait, whatever lies beneath may surface without us." He stood, buttoning his coat with mechanical precision. "I would rather witness the truth from within the shadows than from the banks alongside the unknowing." His conviction left no room for argument. We left Baker Street under moonless skies, taking no cab this time. Holmes's route was indirect, 3 turns south, a detour across the canal, then through a narrow lane behind a shuttered alehouse, all to shake the possibility of watchers. Only when we reached the outskirts of the countryside did he permit us to move at normal pace. We arrived at the estate not through the gates, but through the same culvert we'd used the night prior, lanterns hooded to cast only thin slivers of light. As we descended into the damp stone tunnels, I could feel the pressure of the earth around us, not oppressive, but expectant, as though we trespassed upon ground that remembered ancient foundations. The chamber was colder this time, water dripping in rhythmic taps that mimicked distant footfalls. The machinery loomed vast and skeletal in the lantern glow, iron wheels suspended over dark water, gears half submerged, chains disappearing into unseen depths. Holmes stepped lightly, fingers trailing along the metal as though reading a language inscribed in rust. "This was built to lift water," he murmured, eyes narrowing. "Now it forces water into separate channels, away from a central cavity, a deliberate inversion." I knelt beside a narrow canal where water flowed sluggishly through grated vents. Beneath the surface, faint illumination pulsed, a sickly green hue not bright enough to see clearly, but steady, deliberate, unnatural. "Light," I whispered. "That is not lantern fire." Holmes crouched beside me. "Nor phosphorus. It is refracted, not emitted. Something below reflects light from a different source. As we studied the glow, a soft metallic hum rose beneath our feet, steady and rhythmic, like a heartbeat rendered by machinery. Holmes stood sharply. They are lowering the water now. The sound grew louder, gears turning somewhere beyond the chamber, metal scraping over stone. The floor trembled faintly. Water receded inch by inch, exposing curved walls lined in moss and something else I could not immediately name. Markings etched into stone, half eroded, but unmistakably man-made. Holmes traced them with a gloved hand. These symbols predate Victorian architecture, perhaps even the Roman occupation. Before I could question him further, footsteps echoed from the far catwalk, rapid, purposeful. Holmes extinguished our lantern and pulled me behind a pillar just as two figures entered the chamber. The steward and another man, shorter, with a limp and a canvas satchel slung over his shoulder. "They're nearly at full exposure," the steward muttered. "At dawn, we break the seal. Lord Weatherby wants the vault open tonight before surveyors arrive." The limping man spat into the water. "And what then? You think treasure waits down there? This all feels cursed, if you ask me." The steward gripped the man's collar. "It is not treasure, it is proof, and proof is worth more than gold." Before the man could protest further, something moved in the dark water below the catwalk. Smooth, swift, silent. Just a ripple, no more. Yet both men stepped back instinctively, as if recognizing a presence they dared not name. Holmes's grip tightened on my sleeve. "That," he whispered, "was no current." As the men retreated deeper into the tunnels, Holmes nudged me forward. We moved toward the newly exposed edge of the platform where water had drained away. Lantern now uncovered, I watched light reveal stone steps descending into a curved chamber that had been flooded mere hours earlier. The walls bore ancient carvings, loops, spirals, patterns reminiscent of maritime knots or ocean tides, but arranged with unnerving precision. At the base of the steps lay a circular stone archway, sealed by a set of great metal bolts recently hammered into place. Not ancient. Recent. "This is no ruin," I whispered. "This is a vault." Holmes knelt, examining the bolts. "They sealed it after finding it." The idea struck me like ice down the spine. Why seal a door one intends to plunder? Holmes exhaled slowly, because whatever lies beyond frightened even those who opened it first. Before we could examine further, a lantern flickered in the distance, footsteps returning. Holmes pulled me back behind a pipe housing. The steward reappeared alone, carrying tools, chisels, wrenches, a crowbar. He knelt before the vault, breath trembling. "Not again," he muttered. "Please, not again." He began loosening the bolts. Holmes leaned close to my ear. "He's opening it alone. Should we intervene?" He shook his head. "We observe. A confession made in fear often reveals truths no interrogation can extract." The steward removed the final bolt with a groan of metal. Water seeped from the seams and the circular door shifted inward, only by an inch, but enough to release a rush of cold air that smelled of salt, iron, and something like the deep ocean. The steward staggered backward, whispering, "Elias, I'm sorry." The water behind us stirred. Not rippled, stirred, as though something vast moved beneath the surface, rising. Holmes seized my arm. "Watson, up the stairs. Now." We retreated, but before we reached the exit, I made the mistake of looking back. Through the inch-wide opening of the vault, a glistening curve of something pale reflected the remaining light, round, smooth, like the surface of a massive eye. The steward saw it too. He dropped his lantern, fell to his knees, and screamed. Holmes shoved me toward the tunnel. We fled into the darkness, the steward's cries echoing behind us, swallowed by the mechanical rumble rising from the deep. Only when the night air struck my face did I realize my hands were shaking. Holmes stopped beneath the skeletal trees bordering the estate. His voice when it finally came, was a raw whisper. "We have descended far enough for one night." "What did we see?" I asked. Holmes closed his eyes. "Something man tried to bury beneath water and machinery, and something that wishes to return." We walked in silence toward the distant road, dawn still hours away, yet the world already lighter than before, though not with hope, with warning. We returned to Baker Street with the pace of men who had outrun not a pursuer, but a revelation. Holmes shed his coat with unusual haste and flung it across the back of a chair, pacing before the window as dawn crept over London's rooftops. His composure had not shattered, but it was strained, like glass under pressure. I'd seen that expression only twice before, once after the events at Baskerville Hall, and once after a case in the Midlands we never spoke of publicly. "You witnessed it," he said without turning. "Your hesitation confirms doubt, not disbelief. Speak plainly, Watson." I braced myself. "Holmes, I do not know what I saw, whether that shape was alive, or whether my eyes fabricated a meaning from fear." He faced me then, eyes alight with the dreadful clarity of a man whose mind refuses comfort. Fear does not invent geometry. That curvature was deliberate, smooth, symmetrical. He tapped the edge of the mantle with force. Nature seldom produces such contours at that scale without reason. "You believe it was an eye?" "I believe," he replied softly, "that Finch died because he believed it." The room fell silent. The morning sun, feeble through soot-streaked glass, cast a pallid glow upon Holmes's face. The city outside stirred into its ordinary routines, milk carts rattling, newsboys shouting, the first hansom cabs taking to the streets. Yet the world felt changed, as though the Thames itself had exhaled a secret into the dawn. Holmes stopped pacing abruptly. "We will not return to the tunnels tonight," he said. "We must approach this from above, not below." Before I could inquire further, Mrs. Hudson knocked timidly and announced a caller. Holmes stiffened. "At this hour? Show them in." Lady Weatherby entered. Her appearance was transformed from that of our encounter by the water. She wore traveling clothes of dark wool, a veil drawn back but not off, and gloves that trembled despite her attempt at poise. Exhaustion hollowed her cheeks. Fear sharpened her eyes to glass. She closed the door behind her with the reverence of someone sealing out a world intent on swallowing her whole. "Mr. Holmes," she whispered, "I've come without my husband's knowledge. If he learns I sought you, I do not know what will follow." Holmes gestured for her to sit. "Then let us begin before the day grants him opportunity." She sank into the armchair nearest the fire and clasped her gloved hands in her lap, fighting tears. When she spoke, her voice trembled like a flame in wind. "You must understand, I did not know when I married him. I believed him merely ambitious, as many men of his rank are. The estate had already begun its restorations. I knew nothing of machinery beneath the water." "Yet you learned," Holmes said gently. "I learned after the first winter," she replied. "The river would churn before dawn. The ground shook beneath the orchards. I confronted him, and he confessed the estate held an older foundation, ruins of a village drowned in some ancient flood, perhaps Roman, perhaps older." Holmes leaned forward. "And he sought to excavate it." "No," she whispered. "He sought to rob it." The words landed like stones. She continued, eyes distant. "There were rumors that the Ravenscrofts fled the estate after workers uncovered sealed chambers. They claimed treasures lay hidden there, relics from a settlement lost to water and time. But something frightened them. They sealed the tunnels, burned the records, and left the estate to ruin." "And your husband reopened what they sealed," I muttered. She shook her head. "He did more than that. He hired men to penetrate deeper than any map allowed. They broke through walls of stone so old they crumbled like bone. And they found chambers, rooms beneath the lake, filled with artifacts untouched by decay." "Artifacts?" Holmes pressed. "Or remains?" Her voice broke. Both. Holmes inhaled sharply, fingers tightening on the arm of his chair. Finch discovered one of these chambers? I believe so. She wiped her eyes. But he spoke not of relics. He spoke of movement, shapes beneath the water that watched him from the dark. He begged my husband to stop. That is when he began to fear for his life. The room felt smaller, the air thick with unspoken meanings. Holmes rose, expression unreadable. Lady Weatherby, forgive me, but there is a question we must face. Did your husband kill the gardener? Her breath caught, too long, too quiet. When she answered, her voice was barely audible. No, not with his own hands, but he ordered it silenced. He believed Finch intended to alert authorities, perhaps even the scientific societies. My husband feared exposure more than conscience. Holmes folded his hands behind his back, shoulders straightening in that uniquely solemn posture I had seen only when his conclusions carried moral weight. "And what do you fear?" he asked quietly. She looked toward the window, though her gaze traveled far beyond London's skyline. "I fear not my husband, Mr. Holmes," she said. "I fear the river. Not what lies beneath, but what wishes to rise." Her voice shivered. "The machinery keeps the water high. The moment it fails..." She broke off, tears forming anew. Holmes stopped her words with a single raised hand. "You believe the chambers contain not artifacts, but survivors." "Not survivors," she whispered. "Witnesses." The distinction chilled me to the bone. Holmes turned to face the window, speaking more to himself than to us. If the estate has unearthed a structure built to imprison rather than protect, then Weatherby's excavation may be tearing open what time and water conspired to bury. When he turned back to her, his voice held firm resolve. "You must leave the estate at once." She nodded slowly. "I've already arranged a carriage for tonight, but I cannot go without telling you what I overheard at supper yesterday. My husband intends to lower the water fully by dawn tomorrow, not partially. Fully. He believes the vault is nearly open." Holmes went still. That silence, cold, precise, suffocating, was more alarming than panic. He moved to his desk and retrieved a sealed envelope. "Take this," he instructed. "Should anything happen to us, deliver it to Scotland Yard personally. It contains details they will not comprehend, but they will act upon them." She accepted it with trembling hands. Holmes escorted her to the door, but paused as she reached the threshold. "Lady Weatherby," he said softly, "what did your husband hope to find?" She met his gaze with haunted eyes. "Not history," she whispered, "a secret older than his name." She departed without another word. Holmes closed the door, turned to me, and spoke with grim finality. "We go back to the estate tonight. The vault will not open without us." I stood, feeling the weight of inevitability settle upon my shoulders. "And what do we plan to do?" Holmes extinguished the lamp, plunging the room into shadow. "We do not merely uncover the truth," he said. "We contain it." Outside, the wind rattled the windows like knuckles upon a coffin lid. Holmes and I departed Baker Street under a sky drained of color, the moon a thin shard above rooftops, offering no comfort and even less light. The streets were quieter than usual, as though London itself anticipated the coming dawn, with dread rather than hope. Holmes walked several paces ahead of me, long strides slicing through the night like a man who feared that pausing even once would permit the truth to escape him. His coat flared behind him in the cold wind, and though he said nothing, I could read the grim urgency in every movement. "We cannot allow the water to be fully lowered," he said at last, without turning. "Whatever lies behind that vault belongs beneath the river. Time and tide intended it so." "And Weatherby does not?" I asked. "Weatherby believes in property, not consequence," Holmes replied sharply. "A man of his means imagines he may negotiate with history. But history does not bargain, Watson. It waits." The estate rose before us like a great dark bastion as we approached its boundary. The manor windows faintly lit, the orchards trembling beneath wind that carried the scent of damp stone and turning earth. The pond reflected a shivering crescent of moonlight, and somewhere beneath its surface the machinery groaned, drawing water downward as relentlessly as breath drawn through lungs. Holmes stopped, gazing across the lawn. "He has begun," he murmured. "We are minutes from the point beyond which even intervention may fail." We hurried across the grounds, moving low among hedgerows until we reached the machinery chamber's entrance. The culvert yawned before us, cold air gushing out with each pulse of the engines below. Holmes motioned for silence, and we descended into the dark passage, lantern dimmed to a thin slit of flame. The roar of the machinery intensified with every step. It was no longer a steady hum, but a grinding crescendo, metal protesting the strain of forcing back centuries of sediment and river weight. The chamber was almost fully drained now. Only shallow pools remained where the water had been only the night before. The stone carvings along the walls gleamed wetly, spirals and symbols seeming to twist in the lantern light with an unsettling suggestion of motion. And, at the center, stood the vault door. Open. A full half-turn inward, revealing a cavern beyond. Holmes inhaled sharply. "We are too late." Weatherby stood upon the threshold, a lantern held aloft, his shadow towering grotesquely against the carved stone. The steward crouched beside him, blood trickling from a fresh wound on his brow. At their feet lay the shattered remnants of the last bolt, pried free by brute force. Holmes stepped forward. "Lord Weatherby." Weatherby turned, his face alight with triumph rather than guilt. His eyes glittered feverishly. "Holmes," he breathed, "you nearly missed it. The discovery of the century. Not treasure, no. Knowledge. Proof that London was built atop a civilization forgotten even by Rome." Holmes's voice sank to a low, lethal register. "At what cost?" Weatherby swept an arm toward the cavern. "Look, stone pillars, carvings untouched by flood or decay, and beyond, sealed chambers, each filled with objects unknown to modern scholarship." Holmes moved to speak, but Weatherby overrode him, voice rising. "We stand at the threshold of rewriting the past. Imagine the acclaim, the renown, my name preserved in every journal, every museum." Holmes advanced slowly, each step loaded with deliberate restraint. "And Finch? And the men before him? And your wife, who trembles at your ambition?" Weatherby's expression hardened. "Collateral." The word landed like a blow. "History demands sacrifices." Before Holmes could answer, a sound rolled from within the cavern, low, resonant, like a stone slab dragged across earth. The steward stumbled backward. Weatherby whipped around, lantern shaking. "It is settling," he muttered. "Only settling." Holmes gripped my shoulder. "Watson, the machinery." I understood at once. The pistons continued their unrelenting work, draining the last of the water. The cavern was not settling. Something inside it was moving. The lantern light caught upon a shape shifting in the dark, a ripple, a rounded curve, a sheen like wet marble. The steward screamed, stumbling away from the threshold. Weatherby raised his lantern higher, illuminating the cavern wall. And there it was. The great eye, not human, not animal, smooth as polished stone yet glistening with a terrible sentience, fixed upon the intruders with a stillness that felt older than the river itself. Its pale surface reflected the lantern's glow with eerie clarity, and beneath that reflection moved a slow dilation as though the thing were waking. Holmes seized Weatherby's arm. "Close the door? Now." Weatherby tore free. "Never. Do you understand what this is? A relic of a world we never knew." Holmes struck the mechanism beside the vault. Hard. The machinery shuddered. The enormous metal wheel that governed the vault's closure groaned into motion. Weatherby lunged, clawing at Holmes, but Holmes shoved him aside with a force born not of anger, but necessity. "Help me. Watson!" Together we forced the wheel. Inch by inch the vault door groaned inward. Inside the cavern, water, some remnant trapped within, sloshed violently. Stones cracked, the massive eye shifted upward, vanishing into deeper shadow. The steward fled up the tunnel, shrieking. Weatherby hurled himself at Holmes again, wild with rage. "You fool! You blind meddling!" Holmes ducked the blow, seized Weatherby by the collar, and spun him away. Weatherby lost his footing. He staggered toward the vault just as the door drew near as its seal. His lantern slipped from his hand. It fell, clattering, then tumbling over the threshold, and vanished into the darkness with a sound like water swallowing a stone. Weatherby screamed, not in pain, but in terror. Holmes caught my eye. "Now!" We turned the wheel with every ounce of strength left in our bodies. The vault door slammed shut with a thunderous finality, bolts snapping into place as though the stone itself demanded closure. A deep, resonant thud echoed from within the cavern. Then silence. Absolute silence. The machinery continued to grind, forcing water back toward the chamber. Holmes stood hunched, gasping, sweat matting his hair. "Yes," he whispered. "Flood it again. Seal it. Bury it deeper." Weatherby collapsed to his knees, staring at the sealed vault with shattered disbelief. His voice failed him. Holmes straightened, regarded him with a sorrow that bordered on contempt. "You sought to raise what the centuries had drowned," Holmes said quietly. "But the river chooses its witnesses carefully." We left him there, stumbling, broken, while water flowed steadily back toward the chamber, swallowing the steps and smothering the last whispers of the vault. By the time we emerged into the cold dawn air, the estate lay still. Lady Weatherby's carriage had departed hours earlier, tracks faint in the road. Holmes paused by the pond, now calm, the sunrise reflecting across its unbroken surface like polished brass. "Watson," he murmured. "Do you see?" I saw nothing but water. Yet I felt everything. The dread, the depth, the history shifting beneath the quiet. Holmes turned away at last. "Some truths," he said, "must remain beneath the surface. And some eyes, once seen, are best forgotten." We walked back toward London as the morning broke clear and soft, though neither of us felt its warmth. Behind us, the river kept its secrets.